Andrew Wilson dominates this guy's ridiculous claim. There is a woke right in this heated debate, as Andrew Wilson takes this guy named the Misfit Patriot to the cleaners for trying to claim there is wokeism on the right by crushing him using logic and showing this dude is completely out of his league. Let's get in.
To say is, okay, this is the woke right is there's a duck, right? And the duck is the woke left. The woke right is walking like the duck. It's talking like the duck. It's quacking like the fucking duck. And we're going, hey, that looks like a fucking duck.
Yeah,
right?
but
that's what we're doing.
I understand what you're saying, but it doesn't make, again, I've reduced this already so you can see it a million times. They're not actually quacking like the duck. What they're doing is they're rejecting the ideology of equity and inclusion, both of these tenets.
Woke right is just trans. They're just like, they just look a little bit like the woke left.
They don't even look like them. You just have a failure of pinpointing the distinction in ideologies. And that's why like no leftist, no woke leftist is going to consider these groups to be woke. They only jump on board with that because they feel like it's a humiliation ritual for them that's brought on by guys like you. They don't really think, though, for a second that these guys are about intersectional equity. Of course not. It's ridiculous.
So they're just acting. What I get your argument. Your argument is there's no woke left in a literal sense because the woke. The woke right.
Yeah.
There's no woke right in a literal sense because if you reduce it down to equity,
to ideology.
Well, if you said equity, right?
Yeah, but I'm just saying the ideology reduces to equity.
Yeah. No, I think what you're doing is, and you're making a good argument because left is equity, right, and right is different. So you have a problem with using the word woke
because it's not a good descriptor. Well, reactionary would be a good descriptor.
Woke comes from waking up, right? Waking up. That's why it's woke. Waking up to the fact that there is some power. There is some power over us that we need to overthrow, and we need to take back the power because now there's this power structure. You're focusing on the left in woke left, not the woke in woke left.
Yeah, right? But listen, this started from black leadership who was talking about an oppressor class who was oppressing them. And what equity needed to look like for them. Equity that's the main tenet is equity. But the dissident right, ideologically reduced, rejects categorically the idea of equity. They even reject categorically the idea of egalitarianism.
But that's the left argument, right? So the left argument is the equity argument, right? Woke just means you are waking up, quote, woke, wake, right? Waking up to an oppressed class, right?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't mean that. The etymology of the word comes from the black leadership saying that equity is the necessary. They woke up to the fact they needed equity. Equity was the key point here for all of these woke leftists. If you talk to any, and I've done hundreds of debates with left-wingers across the country, right? I know that you would love to categorize me and say, Andrew just debates with whores on the internet, but the most prominent left-wingers in the world I've tangled with on these topics time and time and time again. The reduction in the argument for ideology from the right comes down to this. We reject social inclusivity and equity. We reject it. From the left, it comes down and is reduced to we demand it. We demand inclusivity and equity. That's the distinction between the two groups. You would find yourself more on what you consider to be the woke right side than you would the woke left side, in fact. Don't you think equity and inclusion is fucking stupid? Don't you think that necessarily is fucking stupid?
Yeah, of course I do.
Yeah, so does every dissident right-winger who exists. The idea, though, that they are identitarians because they're reactionaries, right? And they say things like, oh, we don't want unfettered illegal immigration in here. Does that mean that they're racist? No, of course not. Does that mean that they're evil? No, of course not.
No, that doesn't.
But they're definitely identitarians.
That does not mean that they're evil. What they are that does not mean that they're racist. They just are fucking racist, right? That's the thing. Anybody with a set of eyes can see that this group, right? And I love how you just went through a whole entire reduction argument and then said, well, you can reduce me down to arguing with hookers. I reduce your arguments down.
No. I said it. I think you would love to categorize me as that, not a reduction.
I reduce your arguments down to the way that you argue with people, right? Which is basically reducing everything down to the simplest set, right? Which is your debate tactic, and I get it.
It's not a tactic. That's just logic.
Folks, you can let me know how you feel, but I think this guy is just out of his league. Andrew Wilson is the far better debater, and he's just using plain logic. This is not a tactic. That's not a strategy. It's just how logic works. I mean, he's simply going through it step by step. And yeah, DEI and equity, those are the two main categories of the woke. That is what they want. And look, we wouldn't have called them woke to begin with had they not taken the name. Like this whole idea that, the right is, attacking them with this. No. The woke left chose to call themselves woke. They identified as woke. And then all we could say is like, hey, those people over there who claim they're woke, look at how crazy they are. Once they identified themselves as woke, all anybody else had to do is show how insane their behavior was, and you've already chosen the name. All we did was show proof that you're crazy of it. But the argument that there is a woke right is ridiculous. What this guy, the Misfit Patriot, tried to say is like there's who on the right is quacking and walking like a duck that looks like the woke left. I don't see anybody who looks like that. Put down in the comments, do you see anybody on the right who looks anything remotely like the woke left? Hit that like button if you're enjoying the video. Let's get back in.
That's how you debate.
That's logic, though.
So your logical debate tactic.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, just logical. It's just logic, right?
You're logical.
Well, so when you take logic, you're taking a set of propositions, and because of the law of excluded middle, they're either true or false. So it's either true that the woke right is the same as the woke left, or it's not true. I'm fundamentally saying it's untrue, and then I take the second proposition.
Well, nobody's ever made that.
They have the same tenets. That's the second argument. I reject that as untrue and give my evidence for it. So I have now taken these logical propositions, which must be either true or false, and shown how both are false.
You haven't. That's the thing, right? And I was just about to say what you have done is you have pointed out the distinction between left and right. And I am telling you, right, that there is the woke, just because the black leadership started the woke movement, right? And you have to understand, we gave the title of woke to them, right? We're like they
gave themselves that title.
I say as a pejorative. We sort of
they gave themselves that title though.
We use it as an insult. Would you argue that point? The right uses woke.
Well, yeah, far later actually, but yes.
Yeah. Okay. So the right gave this title as a sort of a categorization against separating the moderate left, liberals, and the progressives, the radical progressives.
No, it's a tenet of all leftists.
Sure, but what I'm saying is every normal person thinks that there is a difference between, let's say, I don't know, like Christian Cinema and Ilhan Omar, right? One's woke and the other one's not exactly woke, right? Like, and I get it that every leftist is woke to a degree. However, when you give this group a name, right? You don't have to reduce it to a literal sense. You're basically going, these are the categories of this group. Woke left is a radical group of progressives that focus on identity, politics, and race, right? What we're saying is on the right, it's a radical group of extremists that focus on identity and race, right? The difference being the hyperfixation on race is there. The hyperfixation on victim mentality is there. The hyperfixation on cancel culture, exclusion, and coercion is there. Those tenets are just present in the group. And because those things are present, no matter how they're defined literally, they are present, then we are just calling it the same thing with a different name. We're calling woke left these tenets, which they have, woke right these tenets, which they have. Now you're making the argument, but everybody has those tenets, and that's when I come back in with it's kind of like really like something that you don't have to explain. You just see it, right? It's like there is a clear difference between the Groyper movement and the MAGA movement. I think that's very prevalent.
I think that they would agree, but that would not. But here's why you're having trouble here with the distinction.
I'm not.
Woke right and woke left. I would say that the woke right is a group which hyper-focuses on using the English language to make political points in the United States, and that the woke left is a group which hyper-focuses on the English language to make political points in the United States. See, they're exactly the same. Do you see? No, they're exactly the same. They both use the English language in order to make political points in the United States. So they're exactly the same thing, right?
Hitler drank water, so
yeah, that's my whole point. When you create a descriptor, right? The descriptor is supposed to point at the behavioral patterns, which you can then dictate based on the ideology. You have two distinct ideologies you're looking at here. One, which is using the prismatic of elevation through equity, and the other, which rejects it. You saying that because both can focus on racial consciousness or things like that due to grievances, that would be every group which exists on Earth. Every single group which exists on Earth is going to have some case of racial consciousness, in-group consciousness, in-group think. All of them, because all politics are identitarian. You just making the claim that both groups have a set of racial consciousness doesn't actually put them in the same category unless you're going to admit that because they both make language the English language a hyperfixation so that they can make political points that are exactly the same group. That doesn't make any sense, right?
Yeah, I think that's a great argument from Andrew Wilson. Like, reducing things down means finding what's in commonality underneath. You're finding the foundational principles behind something. And this guy, the Misfit Patriot, like, I don't know how on earth you can say there's any wokeism on the right just because there's people who do talk about the same subjects, but from a completely different angle, with a different behavior, with a completely different consequence on the back end. Just because people are having the same conversation about anything political or anything this or anything that, you would make everybody else the same. No, that's such a stupid argument. I can't even believe Andrew Wilson is honestly having to explain this to this guy. Like, this utterly ridiculous. Put down in the comments, do you see any wokeism anywhere on the right or anything that justifies calling anybody on the right woke? I mean, I just find this to be an utterly ridiculous argument, that to say people who are, worried about the border, worried about foreign people coming in are now racists and they're the wokeism. Is that what that guy was saying earlier? No, I'm sorry. I find it just utterly ridiculous. I've never seen this guy before, but yeah, definitely he is not in Andrew Wilson's league. Put down in the comments what you thought about what Andrew Wilson had to say, crushing this guy, trying to make this awful, terrible argument that there is a woke right. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.